All right. Welcome, folks. We are here with Mitra Goswami, our Senior Director of Data Science at PagerDuty. Say hello, Mitra.
Hi, everyone. Very nice to be here. Thank you, Darmaine, for inviting me to the show.
Yeah, absolutely. It was exciting. You've got quite a lineup of talks on the data science and data sort of conference circuit coming up. And so excited to be able to kind of pick your brain out of DataCon LA, where you gave a talk. And I know you have a few more talks coming up in the coming months. Before we get into that, I just want to cover a couple of housekeeping items. So we've got today our episode talking about generative AI here with Mitra Goswami. Next week, we'll have Donnie Burkholz, and we're going to be talking to him. He's been digging a lot into sort of like the platform engineering and platform as product space. But he and I were having a conversation about sort of some of the changes in ITIL and how are there starting to be some ways to bridge that with DevOps. We will be taking a break on September 4th for the US Labor Day holiday. And then we'll be back on September 11th with Jason Flint to talk about crisis response management, as September is Global Preparedness Awareness Month, if I'm getting that right. But it's a really great timely topic for the month of September. All right, so let's kind of come back to this topic, generative AI. I think your talk was called "Let's Adopt Generative AI," because I love that. I think I remember in high school, I wanted our senior ball to be themed "Let's Go Bowling," and no one really got the joke. So I was outvoted. But I love that sort of energy in a talk title. Maybe you can start by just telling us a little bit about what was the thinking behind the talk. What were the kind of the key points that you covered for folks, and then we'll go from there.
Awesome. So, Darmaine, a few months back, when all of PagerDuty and we were deep in generative AI and thinking, how do we navigate this field? I had this idea that, okay, I'm enjoying this time. I love how fast we are. I love how flexible we are, and we are innovative. So I'm loving this time. How do I document some of the opportunities and some of our learnings and some of the new innovative ideas that we are brainstorming amongst us? And maybe everyone can look at our journey and share some of their own, also learn from our journey. So I wrote down a couple of abstracts and I sent to a couple of conferences, and three of them got accepted. So I spoke at DataCon LA, and then I'm speaking on September 19th at Data Science Salon Miami. And I'm doing that with my colleague and partner of this generative AI journey, Manu Gurudatha. And then after that, in October, I'm speaking at Lead Dev West Coast. So great journey. I loved the journey and I wanted to talk about it, what we learned, our challenges, our opportunities, and our learnings.
Yeah, I think there's like no better way to solidify something that you've learned is like, can you go turn around and teach it, explain it to someone else? And it does deepen your understanding. So what were some of the kind of the big rock learnings that you took away from a lot of the deep work that was going on a couple months ago where this all came from?
So I'll give a little bit about the talk that I did there. And it has three main parts. Of course, the core part is the learning. But then I set it up saying that, hey, we are doing AI for a long time. It's not something new that we have started. So we have built out towards that path. And hence, we can jump into it. We can right away do generative AI. It was not possible if we have not laid down the foundation for that. So, to your question, I think that is one of the learning. If we have not done that work, it would have been tougher for us. For example, two of the components that I highlighted in my talk. Number one is a good data lake, because all our data was accessible by the data scientists. They can play around, they can experiment, they can easily access the data. And number two is a machine learning pipeline. So a machine learning pipeline, you can think of it as an end-to-end pipeline in AWS, so that data scientists can write code, can take help from data engineers, can build, can productionize, and can deploy very easily with SageMaker, once again in AWS, and then can hand it off to engineers and different product teams. So that is also a very key component which gave more freedom to our data scientists as they thought about the generative AI features. So that's going back to your question. Number one, that foundation has helped us.
Yeah.
And number two is that we were so flexible. We never said this is the one model we are going to try. We never said we only should check out open source, but we were tweaking around, we were brainstorming and we were very flexible in choosing the model. We were very flexible in thinking of use cases. So PagerDuty generally has 2 hack weeks, but we did hack weeks in PagerDuty, generative AI focused hack weeks. And that was amazing, where we kind of got a chance to brainstorm. And our teams had representation from legal, we had representations from security, from data science. So we were all together in it. And we were very flexible and we brainstormed our ideas. So that would be my second learning, but be flexible.
Yeah. I think that's like just kind of digging into each of those. I think you highlighted a couple of things that in terms of that foundation, which on the one hand, an organization coming in and looking at, okay, generative AI is coming along, like, are we starting from zero? And the chances are it's not zero, but there definitely is, the more that you've invested in really building and governing that data lake and those machine learning pipelines, like just the stronger those muscle groups are, like that's what I'm hearing.
Yes.
But also, if kind of like someone set them up and they've been a little bit sort of off in the corner, at least you're not starting from nothing. And then, this concept of sort of being flexible as you're navigating, because there's been so much change where, being able to, like, maybe you could sort of spend a little bit of time talking about the pace of change around, just how the different large language models are evolving and how that sort of really emphasized the need to be flexible.
Yeah. So a few months back, I think 7 months back, ChatGPT came along. And at that point of time, everyone wanted to use OpenAI. And, it sparked a lot of businesses to integrate with OpenAI and build new products. And we wanted to do the same too. We wanted to innovate and we wanted to see some of the applications of generative AI. So we looked at the landscape. And at that point of time, it was OpenAI and AWS was doing something and Google was doing something, and there were so many open source models. I think the first one that we started to look at was MPT-7B from Mosaic. So those were kind of the new arrivals at that point of time. But now the field has more. We just saw Llama 2 coming out of Meta. So we have so many more at this point of time. And we just want to make sure that we are very intentional, because at the end of the day, it's what kind of problem are you solving and not the technology and not the algorithmic model. So what is the problem we are solving? And we have been very intentional. We pivoted to our champion, the customer, find the right use case that are going to solve a business problem, our customers' requirements. And we are going to build up and we are going to decide what technology, what tool, what model we are going to use for that purpose. That was kind of our motto as we moved forward and trying to decide. And also, technically, not all of these models are required to be used, because some models are too big and we don't need bigger models all the time. They are going to take a lot of time. They are going to have more latency, and smaller models are going to reply faster. So we are very focused on the use case we are trying to solve and how we can leverage all this new innovation and accommodate for the customer problem that we are solving for.
Yeah, I guess like to then maybe sort of flip things around the other way. What are some of the, potential mistakes or traps that you can sort of see organizations might fall into? You mentioned like, hey, some models are just too big and they're not a fit for your use case. If you could think of like, hey, these are some of the top sort of stumbling blocks, what would you flag for people?
Find a good generative AI use case. For example, when we started looking at the portfolio and we wanted to decide, hey, what would be some of the good use cases that generative AI can solve? We looked at summarization. We looked at code generation. We looked at chatbot capabilities. Generative AI cannot solve for everything. So the first goal for an organization would be to figure out what is that use case I'm trying to solve? And is this use case going to give my customers some relief? Is this going to save the money that my customer is spending now? What is it that I'm looking for by using this use case? That's
Okay.
number one.
Yeah. Now,
And go ahead.
oh, just saying, like working backwards from that
Yes,
problem.
yes. And the other one is, how do I not uh, just give in to all this different changes in the market, because it's a very new field. There are many Python libraries, there are going to be many new models, and it's going to be in the news always. So how do you make sure that you are actually building towards something and not iterating every day? Because this is a very new field, and
Mm.
some of these libraries that have come up in the market, you start using them and you realize they have deprecated their code, so you can't use them anymore. So it's a very evolving field, right? So you need to move in a direction, trust the ones that have shown some foundations, and move towards a direction and not iterate too much. Yes, being flexible, but also don't change every day, because this field is evolving a lot.
Okay.
And build towards something.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it's almost like the word that comes to mind is that notion of like a Cambrian explosion, where, not all of these species are going to continue to exist over time, but something has occurred that's triggered, the sort
Yes.
of, from an evolution perspective, the Cambrian explosion, and then they will converge, right? and
Yes.
and the true surviving species, if you will, um, we don't yet know what they are. Are there any steps that people can take in order to kind of maintain like a certain level of that flexibility you're talking about, where as components come and go, I'm thinking like from a services architecture perspective, right? That was always one of the benefits of things like having strong API contracts and microservices, so that, hey, if it's, a well-designed API, like you could swap out the entire stack in another service and it shouldn't disrupt that downstream service that's depending on it. Are there principles like that you see really coming into play because of so much, froth in the market?
Absolutely. You're spot on, Darmain. I think so. A couple of steps that we did to ensure that we are providing that guidance to everyone who are building it. We started writing a design document early. When we write down a design document, we are thinking of the architecture. We are thinking of how we are going to interact with the vendors or the open source models if we use any. So that thought process is documented, and we know how this API is going to interact with the PagerDuty use case that we are solving for. And we were able to build up the capability. So, for example, if we are developing summarization, we were able to build up such that we know if we have to switch the model A that we are using or the vendor A, what are the steps that we need to take? This gives us the power to be more flexible and at the same time not disturb everything that we develop on our end. And this was very, very useful. The other area is our responsible use of data and
Mhm.
having good security guidelines. OpenAI recently got sued. It's getting sued for, training their data. So once again, we need to be very intentional on how we are using our data, and that we are letting our customers know that, hey, you have an opt-in option. You can always opt in and opt out depending on what use case, or if you want generative AI features in your portfolio, or if you want to use any. So that is very useful. So we have some of these built out in our process as we are developing these features.
Yeah, you brought up a great point, and I'm going to just drop it in the chat for folks. Because we actually published those. You're reminding me, PagerDuty's responsible use of generative AI. Sorry, hard to type. So I'll just put that there for folks. That should pop up in some of the different chat.
Another point, Darwin, I do want to mention is as we work with these different LLMs, we created a framework so that we can compare them against each other. That was also very useful because as long as if you don't measure, you don't know what you are talking about. So we wanted to measure, we wanted to be quantitative in our approach. And hence we created a framework. We figured out that, hey, we ultimately want to make money using these features. So how much are these features costing us? And that gave us or took us along the path where we thought of, hey, are we going to fine tune our models, or are we going to use few short prompts? So cost is one of the parameters in our framework. Latency is the other parameter. Accuracy of these models is another. So we created a framework that gave us the opportunity, or that made it easier for us to compare these LLMs across the portfolio of LLMs available to us.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you mentioned a couple things. I just want to make sure I captured it. That framework for comparison, you talk about the costs so that you're not ultimately, if you're building a feature that costs more than what it's going to save for people, like, the value, you're not at a net positive value. So that makes sense. You mentioned latency. Something else that obviously is a big kind of area, particularly for generative AI, where, the output, right, can be varied, right? You can have the same prompts run 2 different times and you'll get 2 slightly different answers. And then of course you've got like what about hallucinations and how are those controlled for? Is that like, how do you think about including the sort of quality of output in that framework for comparison that's maybe not as quantifiable, or maybe it is, and I just, because to me, like, sure, cost, latency, I get it. I can build that spreadsheet in my mind loosely, but like, what about quality of output?
Yes. And with OpenAI, we have seen with our experience and testing and with other models too, we have seen that if we can, with our few short prompts, make our prompts very efficient and very specific to the question we are asking, then these kind of hallucinations become less and less. So it's a work on prompt engineering. Of course, it's not going to take care of the hallucinations and everything 100%, but it's to a high degree of accuracy. So we have built out, users can ask any questions. They are not thinking of the most efficient prompt designing when they are asking us questions in English, right? But we can do that on our end. And that's also a work on prompt engineering that we are continuously developing. What can we do so that we can ask the questions to these LLMs and be very specific in asking? That reduces the chances of hallucinations to a certain degree. But if you think of the problems these LLMs are solving, I feel like they are always supposed to hallucinate because they are trying to they are not thinking. But from the training that they have received, they are trying to guess the next word when they are being asked something. So if we do not give them enough data, or if we do not tell them very specifically what we are asking them for, they might hallucinate. There is a chance, yes. And that's the fun of data science and all experimentation, that there is a small area where you can always experiment. And you have to be careful of that, but there is a possibility because this is not exact science.
Yeah. So, you mentioned few shot versus fine tuning. If I caught that, you mentioned this something before, and now it's come up again. So just like, can you step back and just sort of explain, for lay people such as myself, what do you mean by few shot prompting versus fine tuning?
Yes, this is a great question for my data scientist, but I'll do my best. So when we, OpenAI has been trained on thousands of, or, any other LLMs have been trained on thousands of data, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they know about that. However, they are not trained on, for example, my book collections data or PagerDuty's data, which is not public yet. And when I am asking these LLMs a question on some of the data that has not been publicly available, then the LLM might not answer correctly. In those cases, and if I want these LLMs to answer some of these specific questions, I want to train the LLMs on that data. How do I do that?
Yeah.
And sometimes it might be also on the nuances of data. So, for example, I use certain terms that you don't. And I want, when I'm asking question to this LLM, I want them to have that nuance. So how do we make them do that? Fine tuning is a way in how we make that, data specific focused, PagerDuty focused data, let's say, available to these models.
Okay.
Few shot prompts is also another way. However, we have seen that fine tuning is very expensive. And we might not be, and most of the work, most of the use cases that we have seen so far, we can get very good results with few shot prompts. So what is that? Few shot prompts is also asking OpenAI the question, but before I ask the question or the actual prompt, I give them examples of good answers. So examples of what good might be. And I think the general rule is that if I have to give more than 5 examples, it's not a good thing. But I can give as many examples as I want and show the LLM what good looks like. And that's the few short prompts.
Okay. That's super helpful. And that makes sense. So, I want to step back and also ask a little bit about, coming at this as a leader, right? You're the senior director of the data science team. So you have a team of data scientists. How, and to your point, where this is not new, this like the team has been in existence and worked on lots of different models and sort of AI use cases for years. And they still have all that work to do. So how did you approach like making room for doing kind of a new set of experimentation, just kind of from just like a team leader perspective?
I think we all did that. We changed our V2 mom completely when generative AI started, and we wanted to release features on generative AI. And I think this was not very difficult because everyone, and this is not limited to data scientists, everyone wanted to do generative AI. They wanted to learn more. They had so many questions. So everyone wanted to participate in this process, in this journey of innovation. I think the difficult part was, how do we quickly empower everyone else? Or, hey, we understand certain aspects of it, but we don't understand everything. So how do we learn fast? As data scientists and as someone who has worked on data, we all felt that we need to learn everything very fast and ramp up so that we can appear, or we can show that, hey, we have a grasp of everything and we know these things. Some of these were not, we were good with NLP and NLP problems, but not all of us in the group have interacted with generative AI or the transformer architecture before. So we needed to learn and ramp up. But I think it was easy with all that OpenAI did. It was easy among the data scientists, and they really wanted to participate and learn as much as they can in a short period of time.
Yeah, so that makes sense that and just to kind of, just play a little bit of unpacking the acronym, you mentioned changing the V2 mom, that, for folks not familiar, that's sort of the kind of guiding document, that's I think it's sort of out of the Salesforce model with
Yeah,
your
company roadmap alignment.
what are your big goals?
Yes.
So, similar to changing kind of like what are the top KPIs for the organization. You mentioned obviously this is something that everyone on the team was really hungry. And so, you weren't dealing with something where people were like, no, I don't really want to, like, don't drag me into this. I've already got my, you didn't have that problem. When you talk about wanting to make sure everyone's empowered, what were some of the things that that helped with that?
We have these Slack channels that are great resources to learn. Whenever we saw something is important, and hey, this is a course that I want another data scientist to learn or another engineer to learn, we just add it in that Slack channel. We also held some office hours where engineers could ask us any questions. So office hours helped, the Slack channels helped. And then recently in our offsite, we had a joint offsite with SRE and DBRE teams. And it was fun because we had some joint team sessions where data scientists talked about generative AI and in a very informal setting. So there was no, anyone can ask any questions at an offsite, and it worked out really great. So many ways, as we interact more and as we give an opportunity to the other engineers asking us questions, I think it's very helpful.
Yeah. Those are, I think, always valuable tips. And I just think it's so great to remind people of, like, these are some of the things that are available that you can use to kind of get your team ramped up and learning. I want to also just see, like, what, kind of in sort of the spirit of parting words, like any sort of recommendations, other recommendations. You've had so many already in terms of, having kind of a good foundation with your data lake and machine learning pipelines, what you talked about in terms of being flexible, having design documents, concept of, responsible use of data, a framework for comparison. I mean, this is just gold. And so maybe it's, is there anything that we've missed that would be like, oh yeah, you can't forget about this, or this was just a great insight, or this is something that's new that's bubbling up that we're looking at?
I think the one area that I would like to highlight is trust and operating principles. Customer trust is very, very valuable. And this is something we are experimenting at PagerDuty too. Generally, we have a release process. We have EA, we have GA. But with generative AI features, we have had so many additional layers of testing, and testing with smaller groups, testing with internal users. And we have been very intentional, once again, to see how we are using generative AI, how we are working on our prompt so that we can reduce the hallucinations as much as possible. We have been very intentional. So that, I think, organizations should think about how they are going to release these features to customers. We have internal preview, which is great because then our own product is being used by our engineers, and they are trying to, we get a lot of feedback from them. They are our core group of users who are giving us gold feedback. So yeah, I think it's very good to think about how you are going to maintain trust with generative AI models as you release.
Yeah, and I think it's probably just another thing that comes to mind, and this is in those guidelines that you mentioned. I dropped them in some of the comment areas, but in terms of building that trust, that one of the concepts is human in the loop, and so the way that customers are engaging with the output of the generative AI and all the prompt engineering that's going on behind the scenes is there's still someone at the customer who's looking at what's been drafted before it gets published out in whatever, whether it's a status update or a postmortem or a run book. And so that's absolutely, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think it's another important concept in design.
Yes. Someone in the conference, they asked me, why aren't we giving the opportunity for our customers to automatically do automation without a human in the loop? Why should there be a human in the loop? And I'm like, how much risk are you willing to take?
So that's yeah, I think it's a key point and something for folks to take a look at as they start to take a closer look at what PagerDuty has built, or thinking about their own features that they're developing. So thank you, Mitra, for all this wonderful wisdom. Just a reminder, next week we'll have Donnie Burkholz back. We've got a break on September 4th, and then we'll be back on September 11th with Jason Flint on crisis response management. Mitra, thank you again, and good luck at all the upcoming shows, Data Science Salon next month, and Developer Week. No, Lead Dev.
Yes.
In October. Thank you.
Thank you, Doreen. Bye-bye.
Bye now.